All right, we're live, but I'm going to go ahead and hop off. Oh, I'm so mad that I'm missing this. It's such a good topic.
Yes.
Your trauma is not your identity. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I will definitely be listening on the replay. Thank you, sis, for being on and providing this workshop for our Dollar Growth Club community members and for our folks who are watching on YouTube who are considering joining our private community and being a part of these conversations a little bit deeper. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hop off. And see you guys next week.
All right. Enjoy your day. All right. Good morning, everybody. As you know, today is Wellness Wednesday, and we have another topic coming for you. So, we've been talking about trauma and, the triggers, the baggage, and everything that comes with it. Last week, we even talked about our love languages and how our love languages may be even affecting is it helping or is it hurting our relationships? The way that we accept or give love, with our partners or with everyone else that we have relationships with. Today, we are going to talk about trauma and identity. And is your trauma, are you allowing the trauma be your identity? And it really shouldn't. Your trauma is really not your identity. That's the whole purpose of this topic, is to let you understand that your trauma is really not your identity. So the question I want to ask you, like, what is some of the things that you experienced, growing up? Because we know that trauma is really something that you experienced like from the past, right? I know if you hear the words trauma, you hear the words PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, and you know that's how we know that trauma is from the past, because it's something that you experience, from the in the past, post traumatic, something that happened after, what you experienced after, how you feel after, what you identify after the trauma, right? So a lot of people experience all different times of emotional disturbance, but a lot of identity disturbance, right? Due to this trauma that they are affected by. So there's just a lot of a lot of identities that people deal with when they deal with trauma, right? They actually deal with identity loss. People lose who they are, right? They don't know who they are. They're actually wandering around trying to figure out who they are as a person. Some people just really struggle with that. Some people even deal with identity altercation. Alteration, like just trying to, going up and down, like, when you go get your, well, I'm thinking about like my mom anyways, like when she go and get like something altered, like her dress or something, like, she got to get it hemmed and measured and things like that. We go through that with our own identity when you suffer from trauma. Some people even did with identity affirmation, identity replacement, and there's just so many other things that that comes with how trauma can impact your identity, right? Some people are just, people just struggle with that sense of self, right? And we express that in so many ways, and that's why we started leading up to the topic, like your baggage, your triggers, how you express love, how you receive love, um, but trauma really does affect the ability to know who you are as a person. It really does, you know. So some of the things that that are associated with your trauma is like substance abuse, depression, physical abuse. Like if you dealt with domestic violence, even emotional abuse, mental abuse, financial abuse, even being displaced from your home. That's a trauma. Um, any type of trauma that you felt like affected you in any way in the past, those are just that's what it affects. It can affect your identity, and it can put a dent in how you develop as an adult, because a lot of these things happen when we are small, like as a child. Your sense of self starts as a child. We won't get into all that today, but there are theorists like Freud and um, Bowlby and um, Pavlov. There are so many theorists that talks about like how we develop, right? And the sense of self and what that, the attachment styles. And, well, we can talk about that, right? We're actually going to talk about that um, in our next session, the different type of attachment styles and how that, what is it that we need from people and what is it that we need from ourselves, and all of it has to do with trauma. It really does. It has a lot to do with trauma. So we develop as a child first, a sense of self. It starts as a child, what we receive from our parents, what we receive from society, what we receive from our teachers, what we receive from our family members, our friends, all of that, it helps us develop our identity, your culture, just how you are raised helps you identify with your sense of self. So if any of those things are, put a dent in it, then you have like now your identity it's a strain on your identity. And now as you're developing as an adult, you're reacting to that. You're reacting to that dent, that trauma, that whatever that is that interfered with your development. So a lot of people, they try to survive, they try to survive off of this. Like, we experience trauma in different ways. Everyone does. Everyone experiences trauma in a different way, but everybody tries to, I feel like everyone is literally walking around in survival mode, right? They're living life based off of like this survival mode, like this, either that fight or flight, right? That fight or flight. When we talked about the triggers, like a couple weeks ago, we talked about like, how do you respond to these trauma triggers, right? And this, I think about when we start talking about those trauma triggers, we think about like that how are you surviving? How do you survive in your identity now? How do you survive in your identity now? But it may be too painful for some people, but that's how they survive. Some people really survive in this way. It's not healthy though. It's very unhealthy. I have clients who literally are walking around and saying they are their abusers, and or they feel like they have to identify as a domestic violence victim, or a person who has been a rape victim, or someone who has been molested as a child, or someone who has been homeless, was always displaced from their home. That doesn't have to be your identity. Just because you went through that experience and that was your trauma, that doesn't have to be your identity. You don't have to say, when you meet people, you don't have to show them, right, how you are surviving. That doesn't have to be your physical identity or your internal identity. Some people struggle with that though, because they have like that, the complex trauma, that repeated trauma. They just keep, it just keeps going. It just keeps happening, but you have to spend that time learning about yourself and time dealing with those painful experiences. And if you don't do that, then you end up in this survival mode of, well, this is who I am, and so I just have to be this way. This is who I am. I'm going to identify myself as this way. But you don't have to. You really don't. Why not identify yourself as the survivor, of this? And this is the difference, right? The difference between survival, like having that survival, like, oh, I'm survival, staying in that mode of that trauma identity, or being the survivor, right? That past, like this happened in my past, but that's not my identity. That's how I want you to think of it. Like, are you in survival mode, or are you a survivor of your past trauma? That's the question. That's really the question. Are you a survivor of your past trauma? I know so many people that when I talk to them, like, that's all they like. There's some people who don't want to talk about their trauma at all, and I get it. That's because they're still in survival mode. Like, Because there, and when I say survival mode, I want you to understand what I'm saying. Survival mode meaning like they're carrying that trauma, like they're carrying it. They're carrying it right on their back like a backpack, you know. They're carrying it around, they're bringing that baggage with them because that's all they know, you know. They're sacrificing their sense of self for, they're just like, they're sacrificing it. It's a consequence because now, because you're in survival mode, think about it, right? When, let's just, let's just say like, I think about like the shows that I watch or have watched, right? When you're preparing for a disaster, right? I'm thinking about like, let's say, let's say, what is this show called? The Walking Dead, right? I can tell you guys. I was watching The Walking Dead, and I was like, "Oh my God, what if this happened? Like the apocalypse? Like what would we do to prepare for this? Right? I don't know if you can even prepare for something like that. But you're gonna get your ammunition. You're gonna make sure you got enough water. Everything you need to survive, right? And then you carrying all that stuff around everywhere you go. Because remember, if you watch The Walking Dead, these people had to walk around. They was walking around the whole trying to get away from these, anybody that's been bitten. They was trying to get away from them, you know, because if they didn't get away from them, then they would get bit and they would become one of the people that was bitten. So, but the whole time that they were, walking around, they were in survival mode. They were in survival mode because they had all the equipment. They was trying to carry all the equipment they needed to survive: food, water, ammunition, and guns, weapons. All that stuff that you needed to survive, because that was their identity at the time, is survival. But when you're a survivor, you don't really have to carry those things around because that's not your identity anymore. You don't really have to carry around that survival, those survival weapons in the baggage. You're a survivor now. That's in the past. You don't need to carry that stuff around, you know. So think about that. I want you to think about that when you're thinking about like the identity. Some things that people really do struggle with is too like that. This is the dissociation. And a lot of times, like people are like, well, what is this? What is that? Like, it's really a separation. Dissociation is separation. Every time you think about like, oh, when you ever hear anyone say that they're dissociating, they're separating themselves from reality and what's actually, going on in their thoughts, their memories, and their identity. They are really separating themselves. And when people who are struggling with trauma or, PTSD, they experience this. Some people experience it chronically, but everyone experiences dissociation at some point in their lives. Like, you be daydreaming, right? Sometimes we daydream and we think about like, how life could be, how life should be, that's just a common form of dissociation. But this type of dissociation is like really like problematic when it comes to how it interferes with your everyday life, how it interferes with your identity, how you look at yourself, how you really look at your sense of self, and how it just interferes with, how you feel like you're missing a part of yourself. You're not recognizing as yourself. You're unable to even remember yourself as a child. Some people really struggle with that. Like, remember now, when you're in survival mode, right? Because you've been living like this all your life. You're in survival mode. You got all your backpack on with all your junk in it. And you've been living like this because remember, the trauma comes from the childhood trauma, but you don't even remember the childhood trauma because you've been dissociating it all your life. You've been separating that whole process to the point that you done forgot all about it. You don't even remember it. You don't even remember what happened to you because you've been in survival mode all this time. You're not even a survivor yet. You haven't made it. You haven't survived it yet. So there's parts of yourself that don't even seem related to each other. Like, you don't even know who you are. This is who you don't want to be this person. Your whole idea of self is so impaired that you don't even know who you are. There's actually separate parts of yourself and they don't even connect. So, and sometimes it becomes so difficult to like, even try to find the motivation to find yourself when it gets this bad, you know, that's how bad it can get. And you don't want it to get that bad. You really don't want it to get that bad. So what do you do? The question is, like, when I have this trauma and I have this identity and I keep conclude like and including them together, how can I get rid of my trauma so that it's not my identity? How do I do that? First of all, you need to surround yourself around people who fit your narrative, not the traumatic narrative of who you are, but the new narrative, like the survivor narrative of who you want to be. Because I could tell you right now that the traumatic narrative of who you are now, that's not good. Those toxic friends, those abusive relationships, that's trauma bonding. I did a whole session with someone on trauma bonding. Like, this is a trauma bonding relationship, and you need to get out of it. And and you know what people do when they're trauma bonding? They make excuses for the person. Oh no, they're not like that. Oh no, they mean well. And then they come back, and then guess what? The person does it again. That is the cycle of abuse. That's that cycle of abuse. So you want to make sure that you are surrounding yourself with people who actually fit the narrative of the survivor that you're trying to be, and not the survival narrative of who you are now. You don't want to live in the survival mode anymore. You want to actually live in the survivor mode. Survival and survivor, two different. When it comes to trauma, survival is you're trying to live like that every day. You've been living like that every day. That's not your narrative anymore. That's not your identity anymore. If you ever listen to people talk, they'll be like, "Oh, how are things going? I'm just trying to survive." Survive what? What are you trying to survive? I get that there's life struggles. Yeah, there's definitely life struggles. Like, we may have struggles with our kids, struggles with our partners, like, common things. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about, kids that are, be having behavior problems. I'm not talking about like car problems, issues at work. I'm not talking about things like that. I'm not talking about the common struggles, the common daily struggles. I'm talking about, when people say that they're surviving, that's what people say when they're talking about, the common struggles. But we have people out here who are saying they are surviving, or they're living in survival mode, who have those that traumatic issues, and they're alcoholics. They're struggling with drug abuse, still. They have they're in domestic violent relationships still. And honestly, if you really want to talk about it, this is probably what they saw when they was growing up in their home. And now this is what they've attracted now in their lives. And now it's been like a repeated process of every time they get into a relationship, they are attracting abusers. They want to get out of it. They want to get out of these relationships, but they don't know how. So they've just been surviving every relationship. So they think, so they think. You think you're surviving those relationships. You think that you're surviving, being an alcoholic. You think that you're surviving dealing with loss after loss after loss when it comes to deaths, but you're not getting the help. You're not getting the support that you need, So the steps that you need to take is surrounding yourself with the narrative that you're trying to fit in your life, which is being a survivor. You need to be around people who are survivors, not surviving the trauma. And then 2, you need to go to a therapist. Get a therapist. Go to therapy. Talk about those things. A lot of people are afraid to go to therapy. I don't know what it is. I do feel like now people are actually taking those options, taking those steps to, figure out what their options are for therapy. But I definitely think more people should do it, especially men. I think men definitely need to do that. Men need to check into, talking to a therapist. It's not only just women. Men need to do the same thing, and I definitely think that it's important to just be vulnerable. We did a session like sometime last year about being vulnerable, but being able to be vulnerable in places and spaces and with people who you can be vulnerable with. You can be vulnerable with everybody, right? You got to be able to trust these people. You got to be able to be honest with people and not feel like you're going to be judged based off of whatever it is that you're sharing, right? So I think that's important to understand. Are you a survivor or are you just surviving your trauma? Is your trauma your identity? Are you still walking around telling everyone like, I'm a survivor of domestic violence? And honestly, like some of that can be okay, but till how much, how long? If you're telling people like, yes, I'm a survivor of domestic violence, is it impacting your relationships with your partner? Verbally, emotionally, to other people around identifying as this abusive person. I could be honest, all past relationships, I do not walk around and identify. That's not even a part of my track record. I don't even put it in there. It's not on the list for me. I don't even identify as it. I might, talk about it with clients like, oh yes, I was a part, that was at one point a part of my story, but I'm not in survival mode anymore. I'm a survivor. So I don't even talk. I've talked about it, but I've been past that. I don't struggle with that, and I understand that people do struggle with that. But this is where I want you to get to the point where you don't. It's not a point where you're like, okay, I'm a survivor. I'm in survival mode. Because I'm in survival mode, this is my identity. I'm a recovering addict. That's great. I love that for people. I love when people say that I'm a recovering addict and they can actually, express that. But are you still in survival mode? So remember, if you're a recovering addict, are you surrounded by people who are still doing the same thing? Like after you finish helping all those people, right? To help them recover, right? Because you feel that you are a survivor. Are you going back to a home where people are still abusing themselves? So you can't be, and that's another thing, you can't be on the fence. You can't be a survivor still jumping in survival mode, Normalize being around people who are fitting your lifestyle. I'm not saying you got to separate yourself from people, but you might have to if it's going to help you to stay more consistent and strong and not going back to that. This is why people end up, slipping back into that, slipping back into that trauma identify with their trauma, because they end up going right back around the people that once they used to identify as. They go right back around. Why do you think that people who struggle with substance abuse it takes so much for them to actually be in recovery? Like it takes so much for them to actually be like away from the drug and actually recover from this, because they always go back. They always go back. Something always pulls them back, and it's mostly their trauma, or a loss. Something always ends up pulling them back. So, one, this is your actionable steps you're going to take. You're going to ask yourself, are you in survival mode, or are you a survivor when it comes to your trauma? And if you are in survival mode, that means that you are still identifying with your trauma. You are still identifying with whatever traumatic events that you've been through. And if so, if you are still identifying with your trauma, what is it? What are you identifying as? Who are you? That's the question. Who are you? I would love to know. We did a actionable step a few weeks ago about who you are and who you're not. I want you to do that again. Actually, it would be nice if you did that again, because this again relates to your identity. But I want you to do it in regards to your trauma, related to your trauma. So are you still a domestic violence, victim? Are you still a substance abuse victim? Are you still recovering from losses? Some people have more than, this is stuff that happened. Are you still struggling with the depression, the anxiety, you know, based off of what has happened to you when you were younger, you know, from the way that your family talks to you, from the way that your parents treated you. What is it that you're identifying as? It's important to know. So you can figure out like, okay, I'm still in survival mode. And if you are in survival mode, what do I need to do to get to survivor mode? So I don't identify with my trauma anymore. Okay? That's what the actionable step is. Write down on a piece of paper, am I identifying with my trauma? You're gonna write down, am I a survivor or am I still in survival mode? And then I want you to write your who am I and who I am not. And then you're gonna write all the things that who you are based on your trauma, and then who you are not based on your past trauma. And that will help you figure out if you're still in survival mode and if you're not. Because I want you to then scratch off all of the things that you've already processed, the things that you don't relate to anymore. And if there's more things that you're still like struggling with, then unfortunately you still have some more work to do. And how to get to survival mode, again, getting around people that fit that survivor mode, not survival, but survivor lifestyle. Get more around people like that. Check into therapy, you know, find out who you could be more vulnerable around so you could get the help that you need so you can actually get past these things. And I'm always here to help too. I'm always someone that you can reach out to, someone that you can, you know, look into for therapy because I'm a therapist. So if you have any other questions, you can always reach out to me. But I hope that you guys have a great Wellness Wednesday. Take care of yourself mentally, emotionally, and make sure that you are not identifying with your trauma. And have a great, blessed day. Bye.